Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Virginia and DC have partnered together because we know how important this topic is, particularly right now in the world. While we are going to be having a conversation today about how individuals can support each other through having conversations, we fully recognize that well-being isn't solely an individual's responsibility. There's also a responsibility of firms, agencies, legal employers to address mental health at higher institutional levels. We encourage you, if you are a decision maker at any level, to think about how you are creating a culture that supports mental health. LAPS are here to consult with your organizations that want to improve their workplace. Thank you so much for joining. We will be launching a poll and then we will get started.
Just want to check you guys if you can see that. Okay, there we go. You can see the poll. Since we can't see most of you.
Thank you for those who have taken the time to do the poll. We will be ending it now. There we go. So we can now see the results. Where I can see what you're viewing, the poll results. What is your biggest concern? I'm only seeing the answer I put. May I ask, Sharon, what answers are you seeing?
You click on the view details, it gives the answers. Can you see that?
Yeah, it's only showing me my results. Unfortunately, I can't see other people's answers. For that. I can see the answers in the multiple choice question.
Okay, I will share the results since people do not have it on here. Okay, so some of you said, so what's the biggest barrier to having this conversation today? Some people wrote the power differential, like how to speak to a supervisor, how to speak to a colleague, the differences there. Where to start the conversation, not knowing what to say, being concerned that the person's going to be upset with me, finding a private space to even have the conversation. Yep, that's basically it.
Thank you. And with that guide lead in, we will actually now figure out how to have these conversations. So to start, actually, Jesse, would you mind helping us, letting us know, how do I identify someone who's struggling? Are there obvious signs that people tend to overlook?
Well, I would say this. I think it's going to vary between very obvious to very subtle signs. The first thing I would tell people, the easiest question to really ask yourself, if you're concerned about someone, how is what you're witnessing out of character to what you're normally used to seeing this person. So you're used to seeing them behave a certain way, their mood is a certain way. How is now what you're witnessing different than what you're saying? You want to be paying attention to things like their behavior. Are they more withdrawn? Are you noticing changes in their routine? Maybe their moods and how they're interacting with colleagues. Are they more irritable, more angry? Maybe even things like changes in appearance. So, someone who's always been well dressed, you start to see slight changes. Again, some of these changes are not going to be very obvious. They're going to be small and subtle, and they're going to be maybe over time. And then also maybe changes in their work. Maybe someone who's had good attendance is really starting to have a lot of latenesses, or their works, you're starting to see an increase in maybe minor errors. Or you may actually see the opposite, where they're working a lot. Again, I'm sure the legal affairs are very demanding field, but maybe they're working in the excess because they're struggling. It is taking them longer to finish something that normally wouldn't take them as long. So you might see someone who is struggling in work in the quality, but you also might see someone who may be working a lot harder than they used to work. And the one thing I also lastly would say is pay attention to the verbal and nonverbal cues. It may be something that how they're talking is different. And then those nonverbal cues, what are you seeing in just their mannerism that's a little bit different?
Thank you so much, Jesse. And like as Sharon said, please feel free to ask questions and come off mic and share or put it in the chat. And I noticed that one thing you put is changing your work. So in the attorney setting, I can say that when you start to notice someone showing up late a lot and they're always on time or not coming to court suddenly, when you can, like, you've known them, they're always there, they're one of your responsible attorneys you see, and suddenly they're not. It's our serious questions about what is going on. Like there are small things that we all notice that we honestly as attorneys probably dismiss. But we have to pay attention to these small signs that we're seeing.
And Sarah, could I just add to something that you just said that I think is really important? I think sometimes in our profession, we're also a little bit reluctant to just go up to people that seem a little bit off to us. It might not be something overt, but even going up to someone and just saying, how are you doing today? Or are you doing okay? Because I've noticed sometimes that can be a great opening line, like a green light for that person to respond and sometimes disclose and share things that maybe they wouldn't ordinarily share. For some people, I've also seen that it could be sort of, a cry for help, for lack of a better term, because they do want to talk about it, but maybe they just need someone else to kind of notice that they seem a little bit off. So just something to consider, that it's okay to, I think, from a professional standpoint, just look out for our colleagues and just check in with them periodically.
I'm just going to add to that too. I think that really hits the nail on the head because I think a lot of time people will say, I think I might be seeing something with a colleague or I'm a little concerned, but because of the rules professional, like I'm just concerned. And so I think we'll get to this a little bit later, but calling a lap is confidential, right? You can always have the conversation about how to have the conversation. And I also think that just saying, hey, like I'm noticing something is okay too, right? Like here's the information. I'm concerned. They don't actually have to open up to you, right? You just give them the information.
But I would also just like to add on here that when you ask how they are, actually ask it and look at them and pause and let them answer. Don't ask any past like, oh, hey, how are you? I had a great weekend. It's like, if you're going to ask the questions, listen.
Yeah, true. Sometimes you can tell that people are just making conversations and they really don't want you to answer the question of how you're really doing. So that's a really good point.
So you've noticed something different. You've established like, hey, you do want to talk to this person. How do you believe the conversation should happen? What should be the next steps you take? And I would really like, Ethel, if you would address this from an attorney side.
Yeah, Sarah, definitely. So I think it's the first step, I think, is to really ask yourself, do I have the capacity to kind of address this issue? Sometimes as attorneys, we might be in a place, and by capacity, that could mean your role, your specific role in an organization. That could be, do I have the time or even the mental bandwidth and the experience to be able to address this appropriately? Because that person really does, deserve to have somebody who's able to do that. Um, and I think the next step is also to ask yourself, if not me, then who? If you don't feel that you are, one, competent, or two, have the capacity, see what resources are out there. If that person has a little bit of a heads up of what that person's issue might be, having resources and having some knowledge of who you could go to that might have, be in the right role or have the capacity to sort of assist, I think would be the next step.
And the one thing I would say, capacity to ask the question does not mean, do I have capacity to fix? Oftentimes, the reason sometimes we don't approach it because we say, okay, we already 5 steps down before we even ask the question. What if they say something? I really can't handle this. I got all this on my caseload. What if they tell me all this thing? This is not about if they say something, what's the next step? It's just about you are creating space. You might be the only person who's actually, as Eddie said, ask the question like, how are you? But even if whatever they lay out to you is something heavy, something they're really struggling with, it's not about being able to fix what's going on. We recognize everyone is overwhelmed this time and space right now. A lot of people are burnt out dealing with their own stressors. So we're not saying that you have to really fix what's going on with your colleague, but you might be that person that connects them to a resource they didn't even know existed.
I think to add to that too, on the poll when we asked about comfort level, more than half of you said I'm uncomfortable, but I'm willing to do it. Right. So to Jesse's point, like it's gonna be uncomfortable, maybe, and that's okay, right? As long as you feel like your feet are on the ground for that day and you want to ask the question, right? The laps are here and there are other resources that you can sort of have in your back pocket, but you absolutely don't need to be fixing it just to check in on a colleague.
Thank you all. And I really do agree. Like, even if you aren't in the right place to handle it, having the resources, the labs, knowing what's available for you, being like, all right, even if it's just sliding the card on their desk for the lab and leaving it, that is also a solution if you don't want to have the uncomfortable conversation. Like, you can just drop it there. You can't control whether or not they follow up, but at least they now know about the resource.
Yeah. And in addition to what Sarah said, even saying, I'll contact the LAP program with you. Sometimes that can also be helpful. If that person is a little shy, maybe that's the first time they've been in that situation. If attorneys are also empowered to look at these situations a little bit differently, that, as Sarah said, sometimes confidentially people can send like a card, a DC LAP card or a VJ LAP card to that individual, but also offering to say, hey, why don't we both call the LAP program together and see if we can get some resources that could also be helpful.
We have a question. How do you avoid an ethical situation for yourself between checking on a colleague and your own ethics? What is the boundary? Once you ask, you have to report certain things. So yes, this is also kind of why attorneys don't ask questions, because you don't want to be responsible. You don't want to have to report. You don't want to hear about, yeah, I show up drunk to work every single day, because now you're supposed to take a step. But the problem is they're hurting the client in their current role as is. So you need to acknowledge and balance the two of like, look, I'm asking not in the attorney against you. I'm asking not as your boss, not asking as someone to report you. I'm just letting you know, while I don't know the details, I have noticed something different, and here are the resources for you.
I think that's a perfect situation too, where you can call a lab or you can also call the ethics hotline, right? Like anonymously, just to be like, hey, I'm really concerned. And then you kind of get that validation of like, okay, if I go through with this, then I might have to do something where absolutely it's okay. And I won't have to report. I lost my second train of thought. That's okay.
I love pointing out the ethics line. Whenever I talk to the ethics line, the thing that surprised me most when I was talking to someone there, they're like, yeah, unless you have a case with us, it's all confidential. Like if you have a case with us, we shut it down and tell you, I'm sorry, we can't talk to you. But you can call us and ask us any question. It's not getting written down somewhere. We're not keeping track of it. We're just gonna let you know what you need to do next.
I remember my thought too, to go off of that. If you feel like you are concerned about a colleague, right? And you're like, I just can't have the conversation. I'm going to do what Sarah suggested, put the lap card on their desk. You can also write a little note on there that's like that person's spouse or friend like can call. Like it doesn't have to be an attorney calling. I've had many clients where their friend is calling with them, right? With them, not for them. And I think that's really helpful for you just to be like, here's the information, and then they can do with it what they want.
Right. And I think as attorneys, sometimes we get really scared, and we have to remember that not every situation evokes a duty to report. And if you have any doubt, you can always call the ethics hotline. And if you do find that it triggers a duty to report, you still can, in addition, call the LAP program. Because either way, the LAP program can also look into the situation so that the attorney doesn't necessarily have to figure out, all of it on their own. But bringing in LAP is always really helpful in addition. But that was an excellent question.
Does that answer your question? I hope.
I hope so. Well, thank you. Please keep asking questions, everybody. My next question I'm actually probably going to answer first. Does hierarchy matter in this conversation? If so, should I be conscious of the language I use, and what else should I think about? So, as an attorney who works with the Virginia Lab, I have gotten calls both ways. I've gotten calls from partners saying, hey, I have an associate who needs your help. For them, they ask, what steps should we be taking to make sure they come to you? Because they know this is now from their partner telling them, hey, I've noticed this, please go talk to someone. So they realize that there's a lot more stick than carrot there, because your job and your boss is telling you this is a problem, go take care of it. So they ask, how do we have this conversation to begin with? Like, how should I go about it? I have the meeting set up for them already. What information should I give them about you? So yes, that definitely comes into play, and it's something people think about. But I've also had the opposite. I've had paralegals, I've had associates call and say, my boss has a really bad problem and I can't talk to them about it. What should I do? Notice it's a different conversation. When it's the boss, it's like, how should I go about it? When it's the paralegal or associate, it's, I can't talk to them. What's the next step? So it is real. It is very real that you're going to find trouble talking to your boss about a problem that you've noticed. I know that in DC, they will help you walk through that conversation so that you're able to have it in hopefully the most positive way. In Virginia, our lab will actually call for you. We'll reach out and make that phone call, but again, we're voluntary. They don't have to call us back. They don't have to talk to us. So sometimes having that in-person conversation is better because they can see that you're concerned and you're worried. Ethel, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I was going to add is that, in those situations, I think it's just important to make sure that the individual doesn't sort of feel as though they're kind of being backed into a corner, or, it's just important that they know what's confidential and they feel comfortable to disclose, because sometimes I could, see situations where, they're talking to you and then all of a sudden, oh, well, I need to bring somebody else into the situation, or I need to contact someone else. And all of a sudden that great opportunity where, the coals were hot to get that person to disclose has now kind of been shut down. So I would just say it's really important, I guess, how the situation is handled kind of delicately to make sure that person is just comfortable through each, stage in the process. So that's all.
And the last thing I would add also is, depending on your organization, maybe also consult, of course, you have the option to consult with the LAPs, but also consult with others within your organization who might be better equipped to have that conversation if there's a hierarchy power dynamic that you don't feel comfortable having.
Thank you for that, Jesse. You're very, very correct. If you happen to have other partners there, it is something that they probably have also noticed. Or if it's, you have a partner who's absent, who unfortunately doesn't come to the office, so they aren't aware of the situation, it is probably very, very good to either A, loop in the absent one, or B, let the partner know everybody is seeing this, not just you. Because because as has been pointed out by the previous question, there are certain ethical obligations of if you notice impairment and you don't do anything, what that means. And not to say that you should frame the question like that, but sometimes that is how some attorneys kind of get that wake-up call of like, oh, wow, I forgot that. Just because I see him drunk every day, but I'm like, it's okay, that professionally I can't be like that. What is the best language to use in this type of conversation, Sharon or Jesse? Is there script or examples that we can utilize?
Go for it, Shannon, if you want to start.
Join first. I think it's kind of, I think we've mentioned it a little bit already. It's really talking about what you're noticing, right? It's using non-judgmental statements, a lot of like I statements, right? Like you're expressing concern. Use open-ended questions, right? Which I think a lot of folks are really good at, especially in this profession, right? You're just inquiring, you're noticing, you're observing. And just, you know, to think about it ahead of time, right? To really just give it some thought, like how you would want to be spoken to as well. Yeah, that's it. Jesse, you want to jump in?
I think you started it, non-judgmental. This is not about labeling them of what you think because you've been in therapy for years, or you know, a family member. Oh, I think you're depressed, you're really anxious, you know, you're probably drinking. As soon as you start doing that, that person is going to shut down. So make sure non-judgmental, no labeling, you know, no offering advice unless they ask for it. You know, as Sharon said, I statements. And also know that you may start that conversation in that moment. It might not be where it really gets started or ends. So maybe you have to be able to, once you're saying to let them know that you're concerned, you're, as Sharon mentioned, saying what you've been witnessing and why you decided to have this conversation with them, letting them know that, hey, if you're not ready to talk, it's okay. If I'm not your person to talk to, you know, these are some options for you, but also just know you can come back to me later. Because it may be a situation where they do start to feel overwhelmed. They recognize they need help, but they're not ready to really start voicing what it is. But you've created an environment where you say, hey, I am open to listening. So they might come back to you a day later, a couple hours later, or maybe even a month later because they haven't been able to stop whatever's going on from impacting them at work. So just know that it's okay to say, hey, if you don't want to talk now, just know my door is open or my video chat is open for you.
Yeah, and to follow up with what Jesse is saying is that, you know, sometimes these conversations might be happening in the courthouse, or it could be happening in a law firm setting, or, you know, a place where maybe that person's not going to feel comfortable to all of a sudden get into a lot of personal sensitive information. So I liked what she said about just being able to give them another venue maybe to have a conversation. Do you ever want to, if you ever want to have coffee, or if you ever want to talk on the phone, or just another kind of environment that might be a little more comfortable than being in a busy courthouse where lots of people can overhear what you might want to talk about. So, and then tone, I was also thinking, you know, tone, I think, makes a difference. Eye contact, body language. You know, sometimes we can give people, I think, a more welcoming posture when we kind of turn towards them and are looking at them and using the right kind of caring tone as opposed to being in a rush in between cases and, you know, maybe not giving as much of a kind of warm response.
Yes, which, as I said, if you don't have the time to have the conversation, don't start it. Because if you're going to put them on the timetable, they're going to notice because you're going to be looking at your watch or you're going to be looking at something. don't start it.
That is really true, and I love it because it's the thing that we kind of forget. It's like, oh, let me have this conversation super quickly because in your mind, it's going to take like 5 minutes, but you actually never know the can of worms you're opening. So do be prepared to sit and listen if you're going to have the conversation. And if, like you said, if you're not ready to have the conversation, but you know you want to, make sure you plan around that. Um, what boundaries should I think about when I'm having this conversation and subsequent interactions? Like you said, Jesse, you could follow up in the next day. So what boundaries should you put in place to protect yourself?
Jesse, you're muted.
Oops, sorry about that. It kind of goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about when we said recognizing your capacity. You know, again, you are giving them space to share. What they decide to share is up to them. So if they say, you know what, nothing's going on, I'm fine, I just got a lot of work, okay, I respect that, and that's okay. Or they might, again, lay everything out. This does not now mean that you can know every update from that point. Hey, you seem to be getting better. Did you get therapy? Did you contact the LAP? No, this is not what that means. Okay, this means they gave you an opportunity, you gave them an opportunity, they took advantage of it. So just making sure that, hey, I'm here for you, but I'll let you set the tone of how you want me to be there for you. And it's okay to say, if they start, you know, unloading and you feeling overwhelmed, you say, it's okay to say, hey, how about we just take a deep breath together? Because that's going to allow them to ground themselves, but it's also going to allow you to get yourself together and be able to say, you know what, this seems like a lot. I'm so sorry you're going through this. You know what, I might not be the right person. But is it okay if I connect you with a better resources? That's a boundary right there because you know I'm not the person for this, but I also know I don't want to make sure I don't stop this train for them to be able to get help.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that at the end of the day, like I know a lot of people were saying they were uncomfortable, right? That they're still going to do it if they need to. I think it's just about giving someone permission to be able to like let go. And they're probably not going to do it right in that moment. I mean, maybe depending upon their capacity and how much they are in denial or not in denial or even aware. But I think just knowing like, oh, Jesse reached out to me the other day and asked me if I was okay or like noticed some things. Maybe I'll go think about that when I go home, right? It's like you kind of like have that in your mind, or maybe it's 3 or 4 months down the line. I'm like, oh, right. She was checking in on me. Maybe I should think about that a little bit more. So you're just kind of like planting the seed and giving them permission to even go there.
I love the idea of planting the seed and giving permission to go there, but I also love Jesse's point of like, if you not have the capacity or ability to make sure you let them know someone else can, because as attorneys, we are not therapists. We are not therapists. We can't, like, we can't be that person's dumping ground. So you have to be able to have the idea of you are not responsible for fixing the person. Yes, you asked them what was wrong or how are they, but that does not then mean you are the only person they can talk to about this. Instead, it's saying, I have noticed a change. You have had actual change. You should talk to someone. And it's okay. And actually, it is very, very good for you to be able to say that someone is not me because I'm not qualified, as the comment says. We are not qualified to deal with this. But you can bring it up and you can say, hey, this is going on. I can see this. Because for some people, they think they are doing an amazing job hiding it. They believe that no one can tell that they are underwater because they're keeping all the plates in the air. And they're not seeing that we can see their stress. They're not seeing we can see the change in behavior. So just pointing it out sometimes could be the tipping point for someone to say, yes, I need to go talk to someone and get help.
And can I just add one more thing, Sarah? I know we've been talking a lot about, you know, and we're going to get to this a little bit later about supporting the colleague. But again, if that person feels comfortable with you, but they continue to come back to you and only you, it's okay to say, set a boundary for yourself. And again, yes, it's gonna be important what you say and the tone you say it, but you also don't want to continue to be their only person. So that could be your boundary if they keep coming back and saying, hey, I want to be here for you, but I guess I'm just wondering, are you reaching out to some of the resources we talked about? Because I'm concerned. Because again, as a comment mentioned, you're not you're not qualified, you're dealing with your own. So if you're constantly taking in from someone else, that could be a lot. So be okay with setting that boundary. You're not pushing them away, you're setting a boundary for yourself.
How do you navigate de-escalation if they're upset when you talk to them? How do I manage my own fear of the consequences of asking and their reaction? I'm actually going to, if you don't mind, start this one. So we have a 24-hour hotline number here in Virginia. And I had a call a few weeks ago from someone in crisis at 11 p.m. at night. They were at work. They knew they were burned out. They knew they were crashing. They're calling because they couldn't do it anymore. They were very, very stressed. And I was like, all right, let's set up another following call. Come to the office. Let's do an assessment. Let's get you the help. See if we need which therapist is the right therapist, which psychiatrist is the right psychiatrist. And they're like, you're asking me to do more things. I cannot do that. No. I feel like I called because I know I need help, but my calling, getting help, there's more on my plate now. So de-escalating that situation where you're just getting answered with anger. What I did that night was I was like, all right, let's meet you where you're at. And also let's schedule a follow-up on a different day because right now we're in a spiral where there is going to be no positive outcome. So please, let's take a deep breath and let's meet on the next day. And they're open to that. They put me on their schedule 2 weeks later because that was the first opening they had. And when we met 2 weeks later, they're like, no, I need help. Thank you. I will come to you. You're right. So that time away helped them. What other methods or what other ways can you do to de-escalate?
Well, I love the idea of the breathing exercises. I was also going to mention, there's different types of situations that could escalate. I think for just general situations where someone is upset, I think taking just a step back and allowing that person a minute just to take a deep breath or do some breathing exercises even. I know that a lot of us, in lap programs or all of us that are involved in wellness do a lot with box breathing, mindfulness, meditation, just different things that we can walk through with clients. I think that can be really effective because it allows them some time to kind of gather their thoughts to really think about what are they truly upset about. But I also wanted to add that there's different types of situations that sometimes need de-escalating, and those are the types of situations that can get a little physical, and where it can become potential, physical, violent situation. And so in those situations, especially, obviously the ones that are in person, I think it's just really important for people to have boundaries, have a procedure in place, just be able to protect yourself, have security, have a plan. If it's something involving a suicidal individual, having all of the phone numbers, suicide hotline, knowing who to contact and what the procedures are in your organization, I think that's really important.
Oh, sorry.
Sarah.
No, you go first, Sassy.
No, I think you guys covered it. Go for it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because that goes underneath the resources also, knowing the hotline numbers, knowing this, because if someone tells you they are suicidal, call for help. It is not your job to walk them off the cliff. It's not your job to get them back. Call for help. Thank you. Yes, there is a suicide hotline. Utilize it because you are not responsible for their choices And if you start to take ownership of that, you start to feel like it is your job to stop them. It is not. They are sharing because they do want help. So use the hotline. And then for the violence point, if you know someone has a hot temper, maybe don't talk to them alone while you're only two in the office or the only two in the building.
Great point. The one thing I'll say with like, if someone does report suicidal, thoughts, make sure you don't dismiss it. Oh, or try to say, wait, but why? You have so much things to live for. You got a great career. You're about to make partner. You're married. Don't do that. You're gonna be dismissing their feelings, and that is also gonna shut them down. No matter what perceived successes the person may have in their lives, they can still have suicidal thoughts. So make sure you don't try to dismiss it by highlighting everything great. Give them space to talk about what they're having. If you need to, if they don't feel comfortable, again, kind of like I think Sarah said, maybe, hey, how about we call the suicide hotline together? I'll start it, I'll just be in the background and I'll let you talk. How about we call the LAP? Contacting the resources that might be able to keep this person safe. And that is the key. You're not trying to stop them, but what can I do to keep them safe?
To add to that too, if you are concerned about someone, like they haven't expressed suicidal ideation, but you want to ask the question in a supportive and empathic way, because you're not going to lead them to suicide, right? Like either you have the ideation or you don't. I wouldn't be afraid if you feel comfortable to ask a question if you're concerned. I think we have a question in the chat for one of the attorneys.
Yes, can someone speak to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and resources? So I am not an employment attorney, so I cannot speak to this, unfortunately. I understand there are protected classes. I understand you're supposed to be able to protect against disabilities, including substance use and all that, but I am not an attorney in this field, unfortunately, so I can't answer this.
And perhaps we can look that up and possibly contact the person afterwards to see if we can get the answer to that.
All right, so what if someone gives you more information than you are prepared to handle? Like I said, we've already brought this up, but what if they talk about suicide and it's more? What's next?
Breathe. Just breathe. Okay? First thing first is breathe. I know for anyone when they hear that, it's just this filled tightness. Just breathe. They've just said an honest comment, and all it's about, okay, tell me more. What are you feeling? Talk to me. How can I help? That's it. Creating space. It's not about fixing it. It's not about getting rid of the feeling. It's a valid feeling they're having for something that's going on in their life. Talk to me. How can I help? What can I do for you right now? That's it. But the calmer you stay, the more comfortable they're going to feel.
And to add to what Jesse's saying, sometimes people just need someone to listen, someone who's not going to pass judgment, who's just going to be there. And so I know that sometimes we feel like we need to fix it because especially in our profession, we're trained that there's always supposed to be an answer to every situation, and I've got to find the answer and I've got to help this person in a certain type of way. But I think we forget that when it comes to emotions, sometimes it's enough to just listen. We don't always have to fix it. And if it's a situation that needs more, just knowing that you can defer it to someone else. I think that's definitely something that on the part of the listener or the helper is important to remember.
I think this is the perfect situation when you call the LAP or you refer them to a professional, because you don't have to dig into it, right? If it's more than you're prepared to handle, that's okay. You're not supposed to be their therapist. You're not supposed to be diagnosing, right? Like Jesse said, like the calmer you can be, like make sure that you're breathing and your feet are on the floor, they're gonna feel calm too, right? And so really just to be that person to open the conversation and then hand it off to the professionals.
And just one note, one of the most common misconceptions about suicide is if you ask someone if they're suicidal, you're going to give them the idea of it. It is a really hard question to ask someone, yes. And it's not a question I would suggest an attorney ask, honestly. It's more of a therapist or helping question. But if you notice something and you do feel the need to ask, it's like, hey, you've been really depressed, really down, really thing. I just want to check. You can, because you're not going to give them thoughts. If they're already thinking about it, they're already thinking about it. And if they're not, they will give you the biggest denial in the world. It's like, why would you ever say that? So don't worry about asking someone about being suicidal. I just wanted to leave that out, make sure that was out there, because it is the biggest misconception that we come across for this. Right. What do I do if I notice someone is continuing to deteriorate? What if they push back and say, hey, everything's fine, nothing's wrong? Ethel, as an attorney, could you give us some ideas?
Well, I think it's really important to, first let them know, if you have at that point shared that, your local lab person is a great, or, organization is a great resource. And you have tried to directly share that information, indirectly share that information. I really think the best thing to do is to contact the lab program if they're deteriorating, to that extent. Um, I think that having conversations, in our profession is so important, but it's also important, I think, to know when you've reached that point where that person, if they're pushing back to the extent that they're not helping themselves, then I think at that point, attorneys should definitely feel very comfortable calling their lab program, contacting them, and letting them determine if that person is deteriorating, what exactly that means, since the attorney might not be able to really ascertain, the frame of mind or, how serious that situation might be.
I'll just add to that too. If someone's deteriorating right before your eyes, you're probably not the only one seeing it. So kind of just to like take the pressure off of you as well. That there are other people that might reach out as well. It doesn't have to fall on you. But also if that is happening, right? I think it's exactly what we already said. It's a matter of calling someone who is a professional, right? Because it's also about supporting yourself. Like I am seeing my colleague deteriorate. I am really concerned, right? So it's about taking care of you too. Because if the person's not gonna reach out for help, like you can't force them. Like you can't literally drag them. You could try, but like I wouldn't recommend dragging them, to a lab. Not everything's gonna be pretty. It's not all gonna end up like, with a perfect bow. So just to really have good expectations on what you are trying to get out of the situation.
Also, this is where being aware of your resources is really, really helpful. Like if you have an EAP through your insurance provider, through your work, some kind of HR response team, some kind of wellness initiative, it is super helpful because that could give you another person to talk to.
And I would say, it's not just that aspect, but also think about this. If this person is, you want to give them resources, oftentimes we're talking about LAP resources, but letting them know about the HR, how do you file for leave if you have to take a leave? They may not even know like how to access some of these information because they're so in what they're experiencing emotion. So you may be that person to say, hey, these are your rights. This is how, if you do need to file leave, this is where the person you need to go to. This is where you'll find the documentation. You have the right to focus on your mental health, and these are your rights here, and here's where to find them. So it's not just, maybe, again, we talk about connected LAP, which is great, EAP, but you may be connecting them to other resources like that.
And one note I want to make when it comes to like them telling you nothing is wrong. You brought up the conversation. They now know what's available. If they tell you nothing is wrong, Again, it is not your job to be their therapist. It is not your job to force them to get help. You now know that they at least know some of the resources available. You have to be able to, I hate to say wave your hands and walk away, but if it is not affecting their work so much that it's reportable, you do need to take that step back. And sometimes a step back could honestly be, you're not going to personally ask, but you did run it up the flagpole to your bosses. Okay. How do I take care of myself after I have the conversation with someone I'm concerned about? Sharon.
I was looking at Jesse because I know you like this question. I think we do a bar prep group, so we're like, let's take care of ourselves during the bar study. I think it depends on if it's a conversation that you know you're about to have or if it happens in the moment. I think if you're planning on having a conversation or inviting someone to have a conversation, think about your day, right? Think about your stress level and what you have capacity for that day, and then be like, okay, I know after work I'm going to be going to the gym, or I know I'm going to go cook that meal or see that friend. Like, have something planned so you're taking care of yourself after you do the hard thing. Obviously, if it is not a planned conversation, then you'll have to pivot a little bit. But I think it's really about honoring the fact that you're doing something that's difficult as well. So to prepare yourself for it.
The only thing I would add about that is just, what do you do to take care of yourself every other day? You know, are you someone who goes to the gym? Are you someone who does Pilates? Are you someone that does yoga? Are you someone who on a nice summer day go for a walk? Maybe you want to do that and a little bit of something else. So what are those things that pour back into you? That's what you have to do to take care of yourself. It's not about going home and just passing out on that couch. It's great, do it later, but make sure you do something else to pour back into you before that. Because that is exhausting, that is a lot. You know, if you have a therapist, maybe it's talking about, this was heavy for me, but I'm glad I did it. But even if you don't do anything, check in, how am I feeling right now? Because that may be the one thing you need to do. It was heavy, but I feel good that I did it. Okay, it was heavy, I'm tired. I don't have capacity for this, but I'm gonna do this tomorrow morning. At least do a check-in for yourself, inventory. What am I feeling right now?
And Sarah, I think also, people should give themselves, some grace and give themselves a pat on the back that they actually took the time to try to help that person. Because sometimes, busy professionals don't. They just walk on by and they notice things. They don't ever speak up. They don't say anything. And if you've actually taken the time to give somebody your time and your emotional energy and you've put forth effort to help that person, you've got to feel good about that you've done everything you can. And at that point, it's really out of your hands and you've got to feel good. I think look at it at a positive, kind of on a positive note.
I love the idea of looking at it on a positive note because we are so very quick to uh, focus on the bad and dismiss the good. So we could focus on the bad of the conversation instead of being like, look, I asked that question because I actually care and I'm trying to help.
Right.
So looking at it that way and be like, no matter the outcome, I am showing this person that people do care.
Yeah, it goes back to the positive reframing self-talk messages that we give ourselves or choose not to give ourselves. And yeah, it's important not to beat yourself up and just, yeah, like you said, look at it as like a very positive step. Because you may have been the only person in that professional's life that actually noticed or said anything. And maybe that is like step one for the momentum to continue. And that person ultimately does get the help that they need. So I think that that's something to celebrate.
Right. So we've talked about how to go about having these conversations, but let's instead look at if you're in a position of leadership or stakeholder at your firm or your government agency, you're high up, how can you create the environment that these type of support conversations can actually happen? Hethel, you have any ideas as someone here for the Supreme Court?
So, this is actually my favorite question because, I'm somebody that really believes that we can change the world, we can change the legal profession, we can make so much progress if we start with leadership, strong leadership, and then often change happens from the top down. So if you are a leader in an organization, whether that's a court, whether that's a Supreme Court, whether that's a LAP, whether that's a bar association, law firm, any organization at all, I think that managers and supervisors have an obligation to lead by example, create a culture that is welcoming and open to people talking about, their problems, create a wellness culture, create a wellness society, um, make sure there's an open door policy, send a message that it's okay not to be okay. I really think that the more often we see people doing this, the more often it sends the message to other professionals, other colleagues that it's okay to talk. What we're doing right now is so important. I think we need to do this more often. Conversation, I think, is just really key to change. So I think that that's really, I think, hits the nail on the head as far as our conversation today about, yes, we've got specific things that we can do for individuals that are struggling, but what can we do from a broader sense? And I think that, maybe education and empowering people in leadership to do their part is really important also.
Just want to note that when we talk from top down, we actually mean it. I have spoken with several attorneys who are like, yeah, my office is my boss is very much come to me with a problem. It's fine, it's fine. And then you come to him with a problem and he gets argumentative. And it's like, that's not happening. I don't know what you're talking about. That's wrong. This isn't your experience. So
Yeah.
when we say do the top down changes, don't just say them, actually practice them.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Because I think a lot of it in the legal profession is normalizing things. And so if we do the opposite of what we typically do, which is normalize people, attorneys going up to other attorneys, and instead of just calling your bar, the DC bar or the Virginia bar, actually talking to one another and normalizing that, then I think over time, I do think that that would have a trickle down effect. So,
I think that's like 100% on the money, right? When we speak to folks who are kind of like at the helm, right? They're a partner at a law firm, they've been practicing for 10, 20 years, and they say, like, I need help, right? Their associates, their people under them get to see that, which is so important, right? Because if you have a supervisor that doesn't have any boundaries, it's very hard to enforce your own boundaries, right? But if you have someone that's doing the thing, then you're like, oh, I think I can take a mental health day. That's okay, right? Which is great because it prevents the burnout. It prevents things from getting worse and worse and worse. So I think a lot of time when working with clients, especially the younger generations that are coming up, it's cool to go to therapy. It's welcome to, to talk about your feelings and things that are going on. And so I think things will continue to shift, but because we're not there yet, it's important to recognize like who in my team is supportive, who in my team is someone that I can go to. It might not even be your team, it could be somebody else in the office, right? Who feels safe. And to keep having those conversations, because if you're in a place of privilege in your environment, then I think you need to speak up, right? Because nothing ever changes if you don't.
right.
Thank you, everybody. We have a couple minutes left, but are there any questions from the attendees?
And I think we're going to stop the recording. So if anyone has a question that they don't want on the recording, feel free.